Your soulmate wants to spend forever with you. But one final test still remains. There is someone connected to your soul who has already imagined growing old beside you, even though life has placed distance, silence, or uncertainty between your hearts. If this message has found you today, it may not be by accident. Your soulmate doesn't see you as a passing chapter or a beautiful memory they will someday forget. Deep within them, beyond fear, pride, and every obstacle that has tried to keep you apart, there is a quiet promise they have never truly broken. They want forever with you. Yet as close as that forever may be, one final test still stands between the life you've prayed for and the love you've been waiting to receive. This isn't a punishment, and it isn't a sign that your connection has failed. It's the moment that reveals whether love is strong enough to outlast doubt, whether faith can survive silence, and whether two hearts can choose each other without certainty of the outcome. What happens during this final season will shape everything that follows, because some love stories aren't proven by how they begin, they're revealed by what they refuse to surrender when everything seems uncertain. If you believe this message reached you for a reason and you're ready to discover what this final test means for your soulmate connection, subscribe now and stay with me until the very end. There are moments in life when love feels less like an emotion and more like a quiet force guiding two people through paths they never expected to walk. Long before two hearts finally meet, they often grow separately, shaped by different joys, different disappointments, and different dreams. Every unanswered question, every delayed goodbye, and every unexpected turn seems random while you're living through it. Yet when you look back, those moments begin to resemble pieces of a picture that was slowly taking shape all along. This story begins in one of those seasons, a place where hope and uncertainty exist together. Somewhere, another person is carrying a vision of a future that looks remarkably similar to the one you've imagined. They don't simply dream about exciting beginnings or unforgettable moments. They imagine ordinary mornings, quiet conversations after difficult days, celebrating victories together, and remaining beside someone even when life becomes complicated. Their idea of love has gradually changed from chasing perfect moments to building a life that can survive imperfect ones. Without realizing it, every experience has quietly taught them that forever is not created through grand gestures alone but through thousands of small decisions made with consistency, patience, and trust. The challenge is that life rarely reveals this understanding all at once. Before two people are capable of protecting something lasting, they often have to discover who they become when certainty disappears. It's easy to believe in forever when every door is open. It is much harder when distance grows, conversations become fewer, or circumstances seem determined to pull two lives in opposite directions. Those seasons can create the illusion that the story has reached its ending when, in reality, it is still preparing its most important chapter. The person destined to share this future has not lived without fear. They have questioned their own choices, wondered whether they were strong enough to give their whole heart to someone, and struggled with the possibility of losing the very future they secretly desired. Every disappointment left a lesson, and every lesson slowly reshaped the way they viewed commitment. Instead of searching for temporary excitement, they began searching for peace, the kind of peace that remains after the excitement fades and everyday life begins. At the same time, your own journey has been preparing you in ways you may not have noticed. The moments that felt like setbacks were quietly building resilience. The people who entered your life only to leave behind disappointment were teaching you the difference between attention and genuine devotion. Even the silence that once felt unbearable was creating space for deeper self-understanding. None of those experiences were wasted. They became the foundation upon which lasting love could eventually stand. Now the story approaches a turning point. Neither heart is exactly the same as it was at the beginning. Time has softened certain wounds while exposing others that still need healing. Dreams have become clearer, priorities have shifted, and the meaning of forever has matured into something far deeper than romance alone. Yet before two lives can truly move forward together, one final challenge waits ahead, not to destroy what has been built, but to reveal whether both people are finally ready to choose love with courage instead of fear. And that quiet test is where this journey truly begins. The final test did not arrive with dramatic music or an obvious warning. It slipped quietly into everyday life, disguised as ordinary moments that seemed too small to matter. A delayed message. An unexpected opportunity that demanded sacrifice. A season where answers refused to come as quickly as either heart had hoped. From the outside, nothing appeared extraordinary, but beneath the surface, every choice carried unseen weight. This was the kind of crossroads that reveals character long before it reveals outcomes. The person who dreamed of spending forever with you slowly realized that love could no longer remain an idea safely protected inside their imagination. Dreams are comforting because they ask for nothing. Reality, however, requires vulnerability. It asks someone to risk disappointment, to speak honestly despite uncertainty, and to remain faithful to what matters even when immediate rewards are nowhere in sight. That realization became impossible to ignore. At first, they resisted it. They convinced themselves that waiting for a perfect moment was the wiser path. They believed one more achievement, one more healed wound, or one more season of preparation would finally make them ready. But perfection never arrived. Instead, life continued moving forward, quietly reminding them that meaningful relationships are built by imperfect people who choose courage again and again. Meanwhile, your own journey was unfolding in unexpected ways. You were learning that patience is not passive acceptance. It is the quiet strength to continue becoming the person you are meant to be without allowing uncertainty to steal your hope. Every challenge invited you to grow a little stronger, a little wiser, and a little more secure in your own identity. Without realizing it, your path and theirs were moving toward the same destination from different directions. There were moments when both of you almost gave up on the possibility of a shared future. Doubt whispered convincing arguments. Fear painted convincing pictures of failure. Yet something deeper refused to disappear. It was not loud enough to erase every question, but it was steady enough to keep hope alive through another day, then another week, and eventually another season. That is what makes this final test different from every obstacle before it. It is no longer about proving whether love exists. Both hearts already understand its value. The question now is whether they are willing to choose that love even when certainty remains just beyond reach. Sometimes the greatest act of devotion is not having every answer. It is taking one faithful step forward despite the unanswered questions. And as this season unfolds, those quiet steps begin leading both lives toward a moment that neither of you could have imagined when the journey first began. Silence has a way of changing its meaning over time. In the beginning, it feels like rejection. After a while, it feels like confusion. But eventually, if you look closely enough, silence begins to reveal the battles that words could never explain. The distance between two hearts is not always created by a lack of love. Sometimes it is created by the weight one person carries alone, believing they must solve every problem before allowing someone else into their world. The one who longs to spend forever with you has spent countless moments questioning whether they were truly capable of giving another person the future they deserved. Their hesitation was never rooted in the absence of feeling. It was born from responsibility. They feared that stepping forward before they were emotionally prepared would risk damaging something they considered too valuable to lose. Rather than offering half of themselves, they convinced themselves it was better to remain silent until they felt whole. Yet healing rarely happens in complete isolation. As the seasons passed, they slowly discovered that waiting for the perfect version of themselves had become another form of fear. Every goal they reached simply created another reason to delay. Every obstacle they overcame revealed another challenge waiting just beyond it. The finish line they imagined kept moving farther away, leaving them trapped inside a cycle that disguised fear as preparation. During this same season, unexpected encounters began reshaping their perspective. They met people who appeared successful but quietly admitted their deepest regrets were not the risks they had taken, but the chances they never embraced. They listened to stories of relationships that survived impossible circumstances because two imperfect people chose honesty instead of certainty. Those conversations lingered long after they ended, quietly challenging beliefs they had carried for years. Slowly, the walls around their heart became less convincing. They realized that protecting themselves from disappointment had also protected them from the possibility of genuine happiness. Every defense they had built to avoid heartbreak had unintentionally blocked joy from entering as well. That realization unsettled them because it demanded a choice they could no longer postpone. Meanwhile, your own life continued moving forward in ways that neither of you could fully understand. Every lesson you learned, every disappointment you overcame, and every victory you celebrated shaped a stronger version of yourself. Without knowing it, both journeys were beginning to mirror one another. While one heart was learning to release fear, the other was learning to trust the timing of life instead of trying to control every outcome. Then came a quiet moment that changed everything. It wasn't dramatic enough to make headlines or obvious enough for anyone else to notice. It was simply a realization that settled deeply within them. Forever is never built by people who have eliminated every uncertainty. It is built by those who decide that love is worth choosing even while uncertainty remains. From that moment forward, silence no longer felt like a safe place to hide. It became a reminder of everything they still hoped to say, everything they still hoped to build, and every future they no longer wanted to imagine from a distance. Without realizing it, the first step toward forever had already begun, and the next chapter of this journey would ask for something even greater than hope. It would ask for courage. Courage rarely announces its arrival with confidence. More often, it appears in the quiet decision to stop running from what has always mattered most. After so many months of hiding behind reasons that once felt convincing, they began to understand that every excuse had been protecting fear instead of protecting love. The realization was uncomfortable because it left no one else to blame. Circumstances had played their part, but the greatest distance had been created by the belief that waiting would somehow guarantee a better future. That belief slowly began to unravel. They found themselves revisiting memories they had tried to bury beneath busy schedules and daily responsibilities. Certain conversations returned without warning. Familiar places carried unexpected emotions. Even ordinary moments seemed to whisper questions they could no longer ignore. What if the future they were trying so hard to prepare for had been waiting for them to simply take the first honest step? What if forever was never supposed to begin with certainty, but with faith in another imperfect heart? These thoughts refused to disappear. Instead, they grew stronger with each passing day, replacing hesitation with quiet determination. For the first time in a long while, they stopped imagining all the ways things could go wrong and started imagining what life might become if they chose honesty over fear. They pictured peaceful mornings filled with laughter instead of loneliness, difficult days made lighter by shared strength, and a future built not on flawless circumstances but on unwavering commitment. Those visions no longer felt like distant fantasies. They began to feel possible. At the same time, life offered one final lesson. An unexpected challenge reminded them that tomorrow is never guaranteed. Plans can change without warning, opportunities can disappear, and words left unspoken can become lifelong regrets. That realization shifted something deep within them. They understood that protecting themselves from disappointment had cost them precious time, and time was the one thing no one could ever recover. As this truth settled into their heart, their priorities quietly transformed. Success no longer meant standing alone after achieving every goal. Success meant having someone beside them through every victory and every setback. They realized that forever is not created after life becomes perfect. It is created by choosing to face life's imperfections together. Without realizing it, they had already crossed an invisible line. The fear that once controlled every decision no longer held the same power. Hope had become stronger than hesitation, and love had become stronger than pride. The silence that once separated two hearts was beginning to lose its purpose. Something new was taking its place, a quiet readiness that neither of you could fully see yet, but one that would soon shape every decision still to come. And as the next chapter unfolds, both hearts are closer than ever to discovering whether this final test will become the ending of a dream or the beginning of a forever they have both been preparing for all along. Something began to change within them so quietly that they almost missed it. It wasn't a single life-altering event or an overwhelming emotional breakthrough. Instead, it was a collection of small moments that slowly reshaped the way they saw themselves and the future they had been afraid to embrace. They noticed that the fears which once felt impossible to overcome no longer carried the same authority. The doubts still appeared from time to time, but they no longer dictated every decision. For the first time in a long while, hope began speaking louder than fear. They started letting go of the impossible expectations they had placed upon themselves. For years, they believed they needed to become flawless before they could truly love someone else. Every mistake convinced them they were not ready, and every setback became another reason to postpone the life they secretly desired. But experience taught them a different lesson. They began to see that no one arrives at forever fully prepared. Lasting love is not built by perfect people, it is built by people who continue choosing one another while growing through life's imperfections together. This realization transformed more than their thoughts, it changed the way they approached each day. They became more honest with themselves, acknowledging old wounds instead of hiding them. They stopped measuring their worth by achievements alone and started recognizing the quiet strength they had developed through every hardship they survived. The burdens they once carried as proof of failure slowly became reminders of resilience. Instead of seeing their past as something that disqualified them from love, they began seeing it as the very thing that had prepared them to value it more deeply. As this inner transformation unfolded, their vision of the future also changed. They no longer imagined a relationship built on constant excitement or unrealistic perfection. They imagined peace. They imagined coming home after difficult days and finding comfort in someone who understood both their strengths and their weaknesses. They imagined conversations that healed instead of divided, laughter that returned after seasons of silence, and a partnership where trust became stronger than fear. Those images no longer felt distant or impossible. They felt like a future worth fighting for. With every passing day, they found themselves becoming less attached to the safety of familiar routines and more willing to embrace the uncertainty that genuine love requires. The walls they had spent years building no longer felt like protection. They felt like prisons. One by one, those walls began to fall, not through dramatic moments, but through quiet choices to become more open, more vulnerable, and more willing to believe that a lasting future could still be waiting just beyond the horizon. They did not yet know exactly how the story would unfold, but something inside them had undeniably shifted. The person who once believed silence was the safest path now understood that true peace is found not in avoiding risk, but in having the courage to love despite it. And with that realization, the journey quietly moved toward a moment where two transformed hearts would finally have the opportunity to discover what forever truly means. As their heart continued to change, they noticed something unexpected happening around them. The future no longer felt like a distant dream that depended entirely on perfect timing. Instead, it began to feel like a direction they could actively choose. Every day became an opportunity to replace old habits with new ones, to respond with honesty instead of avoidance, and to believe that genuine love deserved action rather than endless contemplation. The transformation was no longer hidden inside their thoughts, it was becoming visible through the way they lived. There were still moments when uncertainty returned without warning. A familiar fear would whisper that they were taking too great a risk or that opening their heart would only lead to disappointment once again. But those fears no longer remained unanswered. They had learned enough through every difficult season to recognize that fear often speaks the loudest just before meaningful change begins. Instead of retreating, they allowed those emotions to pass without letting them determine the next step. That simple decision marked a quiet but profound victory. The people closest to them began noticing subtle differences as well. They smiled more easily. Their conversations carried less frustration and more gratitude. The restless search for constant certainty slowly gave way to a calmer confidence that everything did not need to be perfectly planned before life could move forward. Even their dreams became different. Rather than imagining endless, what-if scenarios, they started imagining shared experiences, meaningful traditions, and a home built on trust instead of perfection. At the same time, they reflected on every chapter that had shaped them into the person they were becoming. They no longer wished they could erase the painful seasons. Without those disappointments, they might never have discovered patience. Without loneliness, they might never have learned the value of true companionship. Without failure, they might never have developed the humility required to protect a lasting relationship. The very experiences they once considered obstacles had quietly become their greatest teachers. One evening, while sitting alone with their thoughts, a simple realization settled over them with surprising clarity. Forever is not something that suddenly appears after every problem has been solved. It is something built one decision at a time, through ordinary moments of faithfulness, compassion, forgiveness, and courage. That understanding lifted a burden they had carried for years. They no longer felt responsible for controlling every outcome. Their responsibility was simply to become the kind of person capable of nurturing the future they hoped to share. With that new perspective, anticipation quietly replaced anxiety. They understood that the next chapter would require openness, honesty, and the willingness to step beyond familiar comfort. Yet for the first time, those challenges no longer felt overwhelming. They felt meaningful. Somewhere ahead, the path that had seemed uncertain for so long was beginning to reveal its direction. The distance between two lives was growing smaller, not because every obstacle had disappeared, but because both hearts had finally become ready to meet the future with the same quiet promise: whatever comes next, they would no longer allow fear to decide the ending of their story. As the distance between two hearts quietly began to shrink, the world itself seemed to take on a different rhythm. Nothing supernatural announced what was happening. Instead, the changes appeared in ordinary moments that suddenly carried extraordinary meaning. A familiar song would play at exactly the right time, bringing back memories that no longer felt painful but hopeful. A place that once reminded them of what they had lost now stirred thoughts of what might still be possible. These moments were not answers on their own, but gentle reminders that healing often reveals itself through the smallest details. They also noticed a change in the way they responded to uncertainty. Situations that once would have filled them with anxiety no longer had the same power. Instead of assuming the worst, they found themselves choosing patience. Instead of allowing silence to create imaginary endings, they learned to leave room for possibilities they could not yet see. This quiet shift was easy to overlook, yet it marked one of the greatest transformations of all. Peace was slowly replacing the constant need for immediate certainty. Friends and family began commenting on the difference without fully understanding its source. They noticed a calm confidence that hadn't been there before. The restless search for validation had faded, replaced by a steady sense of purpose. Conversations became lighter. Laughter returned more naturally. Even difficult days no longer erased hope completely. It was as though they had stopped fighting against every challenge and had started growing through each one instead. Looking back, they realized that every disappointment had quietly redirected them toward becoming someone capable of protecting lasting love. The heartbreaks had taught compassion. The unanswered questions had developed patience. The unexpected detours had revealed strengths they never knew existed. None of those experiences had been meaningless. Together, they had prepared them for a future that required wisdom as much as affection. With each passing day, they became more attentive to the opportunities life placed before them. They no longer waited for dramatic moments to change everything. Instead, they understood that forever is built through ordinary choices made consistently over time. A kind word spoken during a difficult conversation, the willingness to listen instead of defend, the courage to admit mistakes, and the decision to remain present when life became complicated, these simple acts carried more power than any grand declaration ever could. As this understanding settled deeper into their heart, they sensed they were approaching another turning point. The journey had already transformed who they were, but one final step still remained. It would not ask them to prove how deeply they could feel. It would ask them to demonstrate how faithfully they could live out those feelings when the moment finally arrived. And somewhere just beyond the horizon, that moment was drawing closer with every passing day, waiting to reveal whether everything they had learned would become the foundation of the forever they had always hoped to build. By the time this season reached its quiet peak, they understood that the most meaningful signs were not dramatic events but lasting changes within the heart. The greatest evidence that life was moving forward was found in the choices they now made without hesitation. They no longer avoided difficult conversations. They no longer measured every decision by the possibility of failure. Instead, they began measuring each day by whether they were becoming the kind of person capable of building a love that could endure every changing season. There were evenings when they would pause and reflect on how different they had become from the person they once were. The fear that had once controlled every thought had lost its grip. In its place stood a quiet confidence that did not depend on perfect circumstances. They realized that real strength is not the absence of uncertainty but the willingness to continue walking even when every answer has not yet appeared. That realization became one of the greatest gifts the journey had given them. At the same time, they noticed how differently they viewed the future. They no longer imagined happiness as a destination waiting somewhere far away. They discovered that happiness could begin in the present through gratitude, honesty, and hope. Every ordinary day became an opportunity to prepare for the life they wanted rather than simply waiting for it to arrive. The future was no longer something to fear. It had become something to welcome with an open heart. The memories that once brought sadness also began to change. Instead of reopening old wounds, they became reminders of how much growth had taken place. Every disappointment had strengthened their character. Every delay had deepened their patience. Every difficult goodbye had taught them the importance of cherishing those who truly matter. Looking back, they no longer wished to erase those painful chapters because they finally understood that each one had shaped the person standing before the next beginning. With this new perspective came an unexpected sense of peace. They stopped trying to force outcomes they could not control and focused instead on the things they could influence: their honesty, their kindness, their consistency, and their willingness to love without allowing fear to dictate the terms. Those simple decisions quietly transformed every area of their life, creating a foundation strong enough to support the future they had dreamed about for so long. Now the journey stood at the edge of its final turning point. Everything that had happened, the silence, the waiting, the lessons, the setbacks, and the steady transformation, had been leading toward this moment. There was still one final step ahead, but it no longer inspired fear. It inspired readiness. Two lives shaped by different experiences were slowly approaching the same horizon, each carrying a deeper understanding of commitment than they had ever possessed before. And as that horizon drew nearer, it became clear that the greatest reward would not simply be finding one another. It would be discovering that the people they had become were finally capable of protecting the forever they had always hoped to share. The final message of their journey did not begin with a dramatic reunion or a perfect moment where every question suddenly disappeared. Instead, it began with a simple decision that carried more power than either of them could have imagined. After everything they had learned, they finally understood that forever is not something life hands to two people. It is something they choose, day after day, through trust, honesty, forgiveness, and unwavering commitment. That realization became the quiet foundation upon which every future moment would stand. When they looked back on the road they had traveled, they no longer saw only the disappointments that had once caused so much pain. They saw hidden lessons woven into every setback. The unanswered questions had taught patience. The lonely seasons had revealed inner strength. The unexpected detours had redirected them toward becoming wiser, kinder, and more compassionate than they had ever been before. Even the silence they once feared now seemed like an important chapter that had allowed both hearts to mature before their paths truly aligned. The future no longer appeared as a distant dream that depended on perfect timing or flawless circumstances. It became something much more beautiful, an opportunity waiting to be shaped by everyday choices. They imagined ordinary mornings filled with quiet conversations, evenings spent encouraging one another after difficult days, and years marked not by perfection but by faithfulness. The vision of forever had changed. It was no longer about escaping hardship. It was about facing every hardship together with hearts that had already learned the value of staying. As this understanding settled deeply within them, an unexpected peace replaced the urgency they had carried for so long. They no longer felt pressured to force every door open or demand immediate answers. They realized that the strongest relationships are rarely built through rushed decisions. They are built through steady commitment, mutual respect, and the willingness to continue choosing one another even after the excitement of new beginnings has faded. That quiet confidence allowed hope to grow without fear constantly interrupting it. The greatest surprise was discovering that the final test had never been about proving how deeply they could feel. Love had existed long before either of them fully understood it. The real test was whether they would allow that love to transform the way they lived. Would they choose patience over pride, understanding over assumptions, courage over hesitation, and grace over resentment? Those questions mattered far more than any single moment because they would determine the quality of every chapter still waiting to be written. Standing at the edge of this new beginning, they finally realized something that had been quietly unfolding throughout the entire journey. Forever is not found at the end of the road. Forever begins the moment two people stop allowing fear to write their story and start building a future through intentional acts of love. And with hearts transformed by every lesson behind them, they stepped forward together, ready to discover that the life they had long imagined was no longer a distant hope, it was becoming the next chapter they would create, one faithful day at a time. As they stepped into this new season, they discovered that the greatest victories are often invisible to everyone except the people who lived through the struggle. No audience applauded the quiet choices they had made. No celebration marked the countless moments they refused to let fear have the final word. Yet those unseen decisions had become the strongest foundation either of them could have hoped for. Every act of patience, every lesson learned, and every moment of personal growth had prepared them for a future that could withstand far more than fleeting emotions. Looking ahead, they no longer searched for guarantees that everything would always be easy. They understood that every meaningful relationship would experience unexpected storms. There would be days of misunderstanding, seasons of uncertainty, and moments when life demanded more strength than either of them believed they possessed. The difference now was that they no longer viewed those challenges as signs that love was failing. They recognized them as opportunities to choose one another again, proving that commitment becomes stronger each time it survives another difficult chapter. Their conversations gradually became more open than ever before. Instead of hiding their fears behind silence, they learned to speak with honesty. Instead of expecting the other person to read unspoken emotions, they chose clarity and compassion. The walls that once kept them emotionally distant slowly disappeared, replaced by trust that had been earned through time rather than imagined through hope alone. It was in these ordinary exchanges, not grand declarations, that forever truly began taking shape. There were moments when they paused to appreciate how far they had come. The people standing here now were not the same individuals who had started this journey. They carried greater wisdom, deeper empathy, and a quieter confidence that could never have been developed without every challenge they had faced. What once seemed like delays had become preparation. What once felt like endings had quietly redirected them toward a beginning far stronger than either of them could have imagined. As the years stretched before them in their imagination, they no longer measured success by extraordinary milestones alone. They pictured peaceful mornings, shared responsibilities, laughter after difficult days, and the comfort of knowing someone would remain beside them through every changing season. They realized that forever is built inside ordinary moments repeated with extraordinary faithfulness. Those simple days would eventually become the memories they treasured most. And so the journey reached its quiet conclusion, not because every mystery had been solved, but because both hearts had finally become ready for the future they once feared. The final test had never been about discovering whether love existed. It had been about discovering whether two people could become the kind of partners who would protect that love through every chapter life placed before them. Having chosen courage over fear, honesty over silence, and commitment over uncertainty, they walked forward together with peaceful hearts, knowing that the most beautiful part of their story was no longer something they were waiting to find. It was something they would create together, one ordinary, faithful, and unforgettable day at a time. Every step of this journey has led to one simple truth: lasting love is not defined by how quickly two hearts find each other, but by who they become while finding their way. The waiting, the silence, the unanswered questions, the moments of doubt, and the quiet victories were never meaningless. Each experience shaped two people into stronger, wiser, and more compassionate versions of themselves. By the time they stood at the edge of their new beginning, they understood that forever is not built through perfect circumstances. It is built through thousands of ordinary choices to remain kind, honest, patient, forgiving, and faithful, even when life becomes difficult. If there is one final lesson hidden within this story, it is this: the greatest relationships are not those that never face challenges. They are the ones that refuse to let those challenges become the end of their story. Real love grows stronger when two people choose understanding over assumptions, courage over fear, and hope over despair. Every obstacle becomes another opportunity to build a foundation strong enough to endure whatever tomorrow brings. Perhaps that is why the final test was never meant to separate two hearts. It was meant to prepare them for the future they had always hoped to share. The journey changed them long before they stood together, ensuring that when the moment finally arrived, they would not simply discover love, they would be ready to protect it for a lifetime. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Your support inspires us to continue creating heartfelt stories like this one. Until next time, keep believing in hope, keep growing through every season of life, and remember that some of the most beautiful endings are simply the beginning of a forever worth waiting for.